cool because now I get to know what it felt like.
What the world never saw was the cost of being misunderstood at every stage of life. Fame did not arrive as a reward, it arrived as a test. And from the moment she stepped into the spotlight, she was expected to explain herself, her body, her past, her ambition, her pain. No success was ever allowed to simply be success. Every achievement came with suspicion attached. She learned quickly that visibility does not equal power. In fact, the more visible she became, the less control she seemed to have. Her image was debated by strangers. Her intentions were questioned by institutions. Her humanity was reduced to caricature. She smiled anyway, because smiling was survival. Behind closed doors, she was still the same woman who feared instability, who worried about tomorrow, who carried the weight of childhood abandonment into adulthood. Money did not erase insecurity, attention did not heal old wounds, and admiration did not protect her from loneliness, yet she kept moving forward. Not because it was easy, but because stopping meant falling back into the life she had escaped. A life defined by limitation rather than possibility. The world loves simple stories, heroes or villains, winners or frauds. But her life refused to fit into a single narrative. It existed in the uncomfortable space between resilience and vulnerability. And that made people uneasy. So they simplified her. They mocked her. They judged her. But history has a way of slowing down, of re-examining what once felt obvious. And when the noise fades, a different truth begins to surface. One that asks not who she appeared to be, but who she was forced to become. Because this story was never about scandal. It was about a woman trying to survive a world that only wanted her image, not her truth. What few people understood was how isolating those early years truly were. Small towns have long memories and short patience for anyone who doesn't fit in. She felt watched, judged, and quietly dismissed before she ever had a chance to define herself. Every mistake felt permanent, every dream felt unrealistic. There were nights she lay awake imagining a different life, not one of luxury, but of dignity, a life where effort led to progress. Where being different wasn't treated as a flaw, but reality was relentless. Bills arrived whether hope existed or not. Childcare costs more than dreams, and ambition, without guidance or resources, becomes a constant ache rather than a roadmap. She learned resilience the hard way, not from motivational speeches, but from exhaustion, from standing on her feet for hours, from counting tips, from calculating how far each dollar could stretch. Motherhood sharpened her resolve. Her child wasn't a burden, he was her anchor. Every decision she made carried his future with it. She wanted more for him than survival. She wanted possibility. That desire pushed her toward risks she never imagined taking. Not because she was reckless, but because she was trapped between stagnation and uncertainty. And uncertainty, at least, offered a chance. The world would later call her choices controversial. But controversy is a luxury afforded only to those who have alternatives. She didn't. She was navigating adulthood without a map, raising a child without support, chasing hope without permission. And in those years, long before cameras and contracts, she developed the one skill that would define her entire life: the ability to endure judgment in silence, while still moving forward. That wasn't ambition, that was survival. What followed was a whirlwind she never had time to process. Fame doesn't pause to ask if someone is ready, it moves fast, consumes completely, and demands constant performance. She was suddenly everywhere, photographed, discussed, evaluated, often by people who knew nothing about her except how she looked. The pressure to remain desirable was relentless. Youth became currency, perfection became expectation, and vulnerability became weakness in an industry that thrived on illusion. She tried to adapt, learned the unspoken rules, smiled through discomfort, played the role the world rewarded her for playing. But each transformation pulled her further from the woman she once was, the one driven by survival, rather than spectacle. Critics dismissed her intelligence. They assumed beauty meant emptiness, that success meant manipulation. But behind the scenes, she studied contracts, negotiated opportunities, and fought for relevance in a system that discarded women quickly. The money came, but so did dependency. Management decisions, branding expectations, and public perception slowly tightened around her. She wasn't just selling an image, she was living inside it. And with visibility came predators. People who promised protection, people who offered security in exchange for loyalty. In a world where everything felt temporary, permanence became tempting. She wasn't looking for rescue. She was looking for stability. But stability, when offered without clarity, can become another kind of trap. As The industry began to shift, so did her position within it. Trends changed, attention moved on, and she found herself standing at the edge of a new chapter, one that would define her public identity more than any photo shoot ever could. Because fame may have opened the door, but it didn't teach her how to survive what came next. What followed was not just a courtroom fight, but a character assassination carried out in public. Every filing became a headline. Every legal motion was reframed as greed. She wasn't treated like a widow. She was treated like a suspect. Her grief was questioned. Her motives were dissected. Her credibility was stripped away piece by piece. The power imbalance was undeniable. On one side stood corporate lawyers, legacy wealth, and generational influence. On the other stood a woman whose past made her easy to discredit. It didn't matter what she said. It mattered who she was perceived to be. She was told to accept her place, to walk away quietly, to be grateful for what she had already received. But silence would have meant surrender. So she fought. Each appeal came at a cost. Legal fees mounted. Public mockery intensified. Late-night jokes reduced her pain to punchlines. The same culture that once celebrated her beauty now weaponized her image against her. And yet, she kept showing up. Not because she was confident of victory, but because walking away would have confirmed every lie told about her. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about dignity. About being acknowledged as more than a footnote in someone else's estate. Years passed. Rulings shifted. Hope rose and collapsed again. Every win was temporary. Every loss was amplified. The legal system moved slowly. Public opinion moved faster, and far more cruelly. By the time the world began to understand the complexity of her fight, she was already exhausted, emotionally depleted, financially strained, isolated from the very industry that once embraced her. The marriage that promised security had delivered something else entirely. A lifelong battle that followed her everywhere. And the verdict the public reached long before the courts ever did was one she could never appeal. What made it even more disturbing was how normal the spectacle became. Audiences were conditioned to confuse dysfunction with entertainment. The more erratic she appeared, the higher the ratings climbed. Concern was drowned out by curiosity. Compassion was replaced with consumption. Behind the scenes, there were warning signs no one wanted to address. Slurred words, disorientation, emotional volatility. These weren't punchlines, they were symptoms. But acknowledging them would have required responsibility, and responsibility doesn't trend. Instead, the machine kept rolling. Those around her had conflicting roles. Caregivers, managers, friends, and employees often blurred into one. Boundaries dissolved, accountability vanished, and the person at the center of it all became the least protected. She tried to laugh it off, to lean into the caricature. Humor became a shield. If she made the joke first, maybe it would hurt less. But the body keeps score. Exhaustion deepened, dependency intensified, and grief, unresolved and untreated, bled into every moment. Even joy felt fragile. Temporary relief rather than healing. Public appearances became unpredictable. Some saw her as reckless, others saw her as tragic. Few saw her as someone in need of real intervention. The cruel irony was impossible to ignore. The platform that promised relevance stripped away dignity. The fame that once empowered her now documented her decline in real time. And still, she showed up. Because in a world where attention equals survival, disappearing can feel more dangerous than falling apart. By the time concern replaced ridicule, it was no longer a question of reputation. It was a question of survival. And the next chapter would make it painfully clear just how alone she truly was. After her son's death, time lost its meaning. Days blurred into nights. Grief became a physical presence, heavy, suffocating, impossible to escape. Those closest to her described a woman moving through the world on instinct alone, functioning without truly living. Her son had been her constant, her reason, the one person who loved her without conditions or expectations. Losing him didn't just break her heart, it dismantled her identity. Motherhood had once been her anchor. Now it became both a source of hope and unbearable pain. Holding her newborn brought moments of light, but also sharp reminders of what had been taken. Joy arrived briefly, then dissolved into sorrow. The world offered no pause for mourning. Legal obligations continued. Cameras lingered. Rumors multiplied instead of protection. She was met with suspicion, even in her darkest hours. Sympathy was selective. Grace was scarce. She was grieving publicly while trying to survive privately. Those around her worried, but worry alone was not enough. Support came fragmented, intervention came too late, and grief, left untreated, settled deeper. She spoke of seeing signs, of feeling watched over, of believing her son was still near. To some, it sounded strange. To others, it sounded like a mother clinging to connection in the only way she could. And then, quietly, the story ended. Her death shocked the world, but not those who had seen how much she had already lost. To them, it felt like the final chapter of a tragedy that had been unfolding for years. She didn't die famous. She died exhausted. And behind the headlines, behind the theories, behind the spectacle, was a woman who loved deeply and lost more than anyone should have to endure. Growing up, she learned that curiosity could be safer than caution. Questions were welcomed, but judgment was not. She was allowed to explore, to stumble, and to define herself without the world peering over her shoulder. Every decision, big or small, became a lesson in autonomy, a chance to shape an identity unbound by her mother's fame or tragedy. She discovered her mother in fragments, old interviews, letters, photographs, stories told by those who truly knew her. Each piece painted a picture more nuanced than the tabloids ever admitted. Anna Nicole wasn't perfect. She was complicated, ambitious, flawed, and deeply human. And slowly, Danny Lynn began to see that the woman who had been vilified by the public had also been remarkable in ways the world refused to acknowledge. Her own sense of purpose grew alongside that understanding. She excelled in school, pursued her passions, and cultivated friendships that weren't dictated by cameras or gossip. She found joy in small things, amusement parks, concerts, creative projects, but also learned to navigate the weight of a legacy that most would find suffocating. Every achievement, every challenge, became a statement. She could honor her heritage without being imprisoned by it. As adulthood approached, she began imagining a future where she could blend creativity, intellect, and independence, where her name would stand on its own, yet never deny the roots from which it came. She recognized that she was part of a story far larger than herself, but that story would not control her. In stepping into her own life, she carries both the echoes of loss and the strength of survival. She is living proof that legacy is not just inherited, but chosen, and in choosing her own path, she is redefining what it means to grow up in the shadow of a legend. Her life was a lesson in contradiction. Fame offered her visibility, but not understanding. Adoration came with scrutiny. Love came with expectation. And through it all, she endured, not perfectly, not without mistakes, but with a resilience that few could truly comprehend. History often remembers what is easiest to categorize: the glamour, the scandal, the loudest moments, yet the quieter truths, the perseverance, the sacrifices, the private heartbreak, are rarely told. She carried all of it with her, often alone, and still found ways to keep moving forward. That endurance, that relentless spirit, is what remains after the headlines fade. Her daughter carries this lesson forward. Danny Lynn doesn't inherit just a name. She inherits the complexity, the ambition, the courage to persist when the world doubts you, and she does so with grace, choosing knowledge over gossip, curiosity over judgment, and empathy over cynicism. In her, the story evolves. It transforms from tragedy into a living, breathing testament of survival and identity. It's a reminder that human beings cannot be reduced to caricatures, no matter how enticing it may seem to the public. Vulnerability is strength. Mistakes are part of growth, and endurance, the quiet, stubborn insistence to continue, is the truest measure of character. Today, when we look back, the focus shifts, not on the spectacle, not on the rumors, but on the woman who dared to live loudly in a world that demanded conformity, not on the scandals, but on the humanity that persisted beyond them. Because in the end, she was more than the story anyone told about her. She was a reflection of resilience, a study in perseverance, and a reminder that legacy is earned not just through fame, but through the courage to face life fully, in triumph, in tragedy, and in every moment in between. She grew up in the shadow of fame, tragedy, and headlines that never told the whole story. From the very beginning, cameras, rumors, and public opinion tried to dictate who she would be, but she refused to be confined by anyone else's narrative. Danny Lynn learned early that her mother's life was complex, full of mistakes, triumphs, and pain, but it was not a blueprint for her own. She was allowed to stumble, to explore, to fail, and to succeed on her own terms. Education became her armor, curiosity became her compass, and creativity became her voice. She discovered joy in the small, ordinary moments: laughter with her father, roller coasters that defied fear, elaborate Halloween costumes, and late-night talks that were never recorded. Each choice was a conscious act of ownership over her life, a rejection of the spectacle that had consumed her mother, yet she carried the lessons of the past with her, not as a burden, but as guidance. The public may have seen glamour, chaos, or tragedy. She saw resilience. She saw determination. She saw the woman who had survived against every expectation, and in seeing that, she found strength. As she approached adulthood, Danny Lynn's ambitions became clear. She blended intellect with creativity, pursuing education while nurturing artistic expression. She embraced her heritage, not as a shadow, but as a foundation for something new. Her dreams are bold, but grounded in awareness, a balance between honoring legacy and asserting independence. In every decision, she proves that identity isn't inherited, it's claimed. She is proof that even in the wake of sensationalized lives, authenticity, courage, and self-determination can prevail. The world may have tried to define her before she could speak, but now, for the first time, she speaks for herself, loudly, clearly, and without apology. Legacy isn't what the world reports. It's what endures beyond the headlines, beyond the scandals, beyond the fleeting attention. And in her daughter, that legacy is being rewritten. Anna Nicole Smith's life was messy, tragic, and often misunderstood, yet it was also resilient, bold, and unforgettable. Her story doesn't disappear because of mistakes or death. It lives on in lessons, in memories, in the courage to endure, and in the next generation who learns from it. Danny Lynn carries that truth forward. She is a bridge between the past and the future, someone who acknowledges hardship without being defined by it. She honors her mother's humanity, her ambition, and her struggles while creating a life shaped by intention, choice, and vision. The world may continue to tell stories about fame, scandal, and spectacle, but she chooses to tell a story about growth, perseverance, and reinvention. She shows that even in the aftermath of public judgment, a life can be lived fully, guided not by fear, not by expectation, but by authenticity. Through her, the narrative shifts. Headlines lose their power. Rumors fade. What remains is enduring curiosity, resilience, and the courage to chart one's own path. The daughter does not erase the mother, nor does she repeat her mistakes. She builds upon them, transforming legacy into opportunity, tragedy into understanding, and notoriety into meaning. In the end, history may still debate the woman who captured attention so easily, but what cannot be debated is the life she inspired, one of reflection, perseverance, and reclamation. Legacy, finally, is no longer defined by scandal. It is defined by endurance, truth, and the courage to rise beyond expectation.